So in total, if you add 10, 20, 4, and 15, you've got 49 hours of value embedded in the 5 pairs of shoes at the end of this production process. Now let's ask ourselves, how much value did the capitalist advance in order to produce these 5 pairs of shoes? Well, he paid the worker 4 hours of value for her capacity to work for the whole day, right? That's what it takes to replenish her to be able to work for a day. For the materials used up in the 5 pairs, he paid the market equivalent. He paid 20 hours for the leather, 4 hours for the rope, and the tool machine parted with 15 hours of its value, or 5% of its value. In total, the capitalist advanced 43 hours of value in order to produce the shoes. The difference between the two, 49 hours of value embedded in the shoes, and 43 hours of value advanced to make them, is the surplus value, 6 hours of value. The production process transferred the value of the tools and the materials into the shoes with no change in its magnitude. Therefore, Marx calls this constant capital, C. On the other hand, the labor by the worker created new value in its operation. The first 4 hours of labor by the worker created enough new value to replace the value of her wages. The next 6 hours were surplus labor, which produced extra value for the capitalist. The source of surplus value, therefore, is the productivity of the worker. The labor power of the worker, therefore, is variable capital, V. Basically, the idea is fairly straightforward, and actually other classical economists accepted this too, that a worker can labor for longer than it takes to produce the necessaries to maintain herself for a day. So that's the production, that's where extra value comes from. That's where profit and surplus value comes from. When the capitalist goes and sells those 5 pairs of shoes and gets the equivalent of 49 hours of value, but in money form, that's profit. Profit is surplus value realized in money form. Now I make a quick note here. The payment of hourly wages can create a pretty confusing appearance. So let's say in our example we make one more assumption, that 1 hour of labor time has the money equivalent of $20. Our shoemaker's labor power had a value of 4 hours of labor time. So the capitalist must pay her a wage of 4 times 20, $80, right? That's going to be that's what she needs daily to survive. But the capitalist is going to spread that over 10 hours and is going to pay her an $8 an hour wage. So it appears that she's getting paid for every hour of her work. But if you look at it hourly, the worker performs an hour of labor every hour, so actually creates $20 of value every hour, but she gets paid $8 for her own sustenance. So the capitalist pockets the $12 difference as the creation of surplus value there. So therefore, an hour's wage is not equal to the money value of an hour of socially necessary labor time. In fact, an hour's wage is almost always less than the value that a worker creates in an hour. Individual capitalists are obviously driven to maximize their profits, their returns, under the pressure of competition. One way to do this is to extend the amount of time that the worker labors for. So, if we can make this worker work for 12 hours instead of 10, we get an extra 2 hours of surplus value from her. Marx calls this absolute surplus value. Capitalists showed a werewolf-like hunger for surplus value, in Marx's words, an irresistible temptation to overwork labor. The resulting decline in the health of manufacturing workers, especially children and women, as well as their fight back, made this issue central in the public sphere. Marx's outrage animates this section of the book where he talks about absolute surplus value and the working day. He quotes at length from government reports. A doctor reports, "The pottery workers as a class, both men and women, represent a degenerated population, both physically and morally. They are, as a rule, stunted in growth, ill-shaped, and frequently ill-formed in the chest. They become prematurely old, and are certainly short-lived. In France and Germany, the military standard for the height of a conscript had to be reduced because the working population was getting shorter on average due to overwork from childhood. A county magistrate, kind of like the judge, reporting on lace manufacture, said this: "Children of 9 or 10 years are dragged from their squalid beds at 2, 3, or 4 o'clock in the morning and compelled to work for a bare subsistence until 10, 11, or 12 at night. Their limbs wearing away, their frames dwindling, their faces whitening, and their humanity absolutely sinking into a stone-like torpor, utterly horrible to contemplate." This same court, the same judge, goes on to compare capitalist overwork to slavery in the American South, because the American South was still under slavery. And of course, the liberal bourgeois in Britain were violently declaiming against some of the liberal bourgeois were violently declaiming against the slave owners, saying, "We have the system of perfect liberty and equality, and you people still keep people under the lash." And so this county magistrate says, "We declaim against the Virginian and Carolinian cotton planters. Is their black market, their lash, and their barter of human flesh more detestable than this slow sacrifice of humanity?" Marx also quotes at length from reports about the cultural and mental degradation of overworked children who were left with basically no time for education. I mean, there were a bunch of interviews done with these children, and some of them, this is a Christian society, some of them, like 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds, some of their responses when asked various questions: "The devil is a good person. I do not know where he lives. Christ was a wicked man." A 12-year-old says, "I don't live in England. I think it's a country, but I didn't know that before." Just like the absolute, the people, the bourgeois and the middle classes were like, "Oh my God, the kid thinks the devil is a good person, does not know where he lives. What is going on here, With the advent of large-scale industry in the late 18th century, the situation of overwork and night work got even worse, because night work was another way to extend the working day. And Marx's quote here was, "Capital was celebrating its orgies." In the middle of the 18th century, the working class organized a political movement for restricting the workday, and over a period of 30 years, against the bitter and determined resistance of the manufacturers, by the way, the Factory Acts were passed, which created a 10-hour day in most industries, somewhat moderating overwork. And the London Times summarized the lesson to be learned. "Though the health of a population is so important a fact of the national capital, we are afraid it must be said that the class of employers of labor have not been the most forward to guard and cherish this treasure. The consideration of the health of the operatives was forced upon the mill owners." Marx goes on to discuss another way that capitalists can increase the amount of surplus value, and that's by reducing the value of labor power itself. Marx calls this relative surplus value. How can the value of labor power be reduced? Well, by increasing the productivity of labor, the necessaries of life can be produced more efficiently, so that they embody less labor time. If food, beer, meat, clothing, shelter, if they can be produced with less labor time embedded in them, then on the whole, the value of labor power will come down, and the amount of surplus value produced in a given working day will go up. So if the Guinness costs, half an hour of labor time instead of 1 hour of labor time, then the value, the necessaries for the worker to replenish herself drop in value. Marx goes through many different ways in which capitalist production has increased the productivity of labor under the pressure of competition on the market. But if you organize a whole army of workers in a cooperative way, that increases the productivity of their labor. If you apply science and machinery, that increases the productivity of labor, particularly, better tools, better machinery. And that's all I'm going to say about relative surplus value for now. I'm doing an injustice to the section. It's quite long and quite wonderful, but I don't have time for it. So I'm going to move on to two of the last points here. Accumulation. This is a section where Marx ties many of the threads of his analysis together. So, if people remember, we started with M commodities, M prime, the general formula for one cycle of capital. We saw that the middle C there, MC, the middle C here, contains production within it. The capitalist uses M to purchase a set of commodities, let's say Com 1, consumes them to produce a new set of commodities, Com 2, and then sells Com 2 on the market to get M prime. So I think if you follow along the sheet here, I have that kind of broken out right above that, right above the absolute surplus value. I have that kind of broken out there. So Com 1, commodities 1, is composed of the means of production, which we'll call C for constant capital. This is the tools and the material. And it's composed of labor power, which we'll call V, variable capital, or wages. That's what that is. So commodities 1 is C plus V. The value of commodities 1, rather, is C plus V. We go through the process of production, in which the means of production and the labor power are consumed. And resulting from that is a new mass of commodities, commodities 2, that the capitalist intends to sell. The value of commodities 2 has two components, maybe three components, or however many components you want to, but these are the ones I'm going to go through. So the value of commodities 2 includes the value of the means of production, C, which just transfer wholesale into the produced commodities with no change in magnitude. And we established that in a given period, workers produce enough value to cover their own wages, their own value, and create a surplus value for the boss. So, commodities 2 contains V plus S, variable capital plus surplus value. So the value of commodity 2 is C plus V plus S. The capitalist then sells this for its money equivalent, M prime, and the surplus value, or M plus delta M there, and the surplus value determines how much profit the capitalist makes. Roughly speaking, all of the things being stable, S, the surplus value created will equal, in money form, delta M, or the profit. We know that capitalists don't stop after just one round, that they continue to produce. So Marx now asks, what happens if you take M prime and you connect it back around to M, to the beginning of a new round of production? And now we get some interesting results, particularly when viewed from the level of classes in a society, instead of the standpoint of an individual capitalist or an individual worker. That's the cycle that's down at the bottom of the backside there. One thing you can see from here is that these cycles produce a stream of surplus value. And some of that is what the capitalists live off of. They live off of the unpaid labor of others. So they take a slice off of S and they consume it themselves. In order to expand their production, to grow and compete with others, to invest in new technology, the capitalist takes most of S, most of the surplus value, and throws it right back into the process of production for a new round of capital accumulation. They reinvest it. So our new starting capital is the original M plus something. And you can see, for those who have somewhat of a math background, this is an exponential process. It builds on itself. As Marx famously said, accumulate, accumulate. That is Moses and the prophets. Accumulation for the sake of accumulation. Production for the sake of production. The historical mission of the bourgeoisie. If the starting capital M is now bigger, and the conditions of production remain unchanged, the capitalists will buy more means of production, capital, and more labor power, V, for the next cycle. That means capitalism needs and drives growth in the size of the working population. As the capital grows, it wants to buy both constant capital, the machinery, and more workers.